Good afternoon, good morning, good night, wherever you are. We have a wide audience today, and with wide I mean global presence from around the world. So welcome to today's webinar entitled Technical Documentation, Whether to Outsource or Do It Yourself. Brief introduction. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm your host today. My name is Barry Browster. I'm the Sales Director for Etteplan, Sales Director for Technical Documentation Services at Etteplan. Born in 1974, 15 years of experience in technical documentation. Had various roles with Etteplan, formerly Tito Press, before we got acquired by the Etteplan family a few years back. And since January this year, now the sales director for Etteplan on the technical documentation side. Just a couple of household things here. I wanted to let you know that this webinar will take approximately 45 minutes. You should have a good audio, hopefully. Hopefully you are also having a good view of the screen here. The webinar will be recorded, so if you need to share it afterwards, or in case you were not able to see the recording, then feel free to let your colleagues know, or to email me at barry.braster@etteplan.com, and I'd be more than happy to send a link afterwards. We're all in the listen-only mode, except for myself, of course. I can hear myself, thankfully. In case you have any questions, you are able to use them. That would be the question mark here. I probably, since we have a lot of ground to cover, probably will not do this interactively, so answer questions as we go along, but I would like to ask you to put those questions in, and then towards the end of the webinar, last 5-10 minutes or so, we'll dive into those, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them to my best knowledge. So, briefly about Etteplan, to those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a specialist in industrial equipment engineering and technical documentation solutions and services. I've been around for a couple of decades now, currently at 1,900 designers and engineers, of which 400 do documentation. Maybe like you, or maybe like some of your colleagues who write, edit, manage your content, and sometimes even in up to 40-50 languages. That's what we do. So we are, if you are a technical author, we are you, but with a different roof over our heads, with a different flag hanging outside, but we are documentationists. So offices, about 45 in mainly in Finland, Sweden, the Netherlands, Denmark as well, and in the United States, Austin, Texas, where I used to be located, and 3 offices in China. More about that later. We are a publicly traded firm. In case you want to learn more about that, please feel free to visit the website of NASDAQ and put in the ticker ETT1V, where you can find how our shares are doing. A little bit about our customers. Very wide variety, not only in the heavy equipment industry, aerospace, defense, medical, basically anything, whether it's business to business or business to consumer. Anything that needs a technical manual or requires engineering to a certain extent is something, is an area of our expertise. That means that any of these companies who we work for choose to either outsource part of the work, or have us do software implementation so they can do things themselves, or anything really in between. Which brings me to the next slide, kind of showing you the flexibility that we offer in our offering, in order to, of course, make sure that our customers optimize their business operations, where we are able to provide the resources in the form of either one or a number of our specialists working on site, helping you deliver your technical documentation, or by having us act more as a consultant, and also by providing the advanced methods that are there, how to create, manage, and publish technical documentation most efficiently and also work with the tooling that need to help you to do these things most efficiently and most cost effective. To literally having our customers outsource part or the entire technical documentation function to us in the form, for instance, of work packages, and create more cost efficiency through our Chinese offices. But more about that later. So the idea is that we're going to talk today about technical documentation. As a matter of fact, later on this year, we're going to do a number of other webinars. You can find those on our website, etaplan.com, where you can subscribe to those. The next one, I believe, will be about the use of simplified English as part of an S1000D or ATI ISPEC 2200 requirement. But if you're also interested in creating content quality for technical documentation, then I would urge you to sign up for that. And then there's another one coming up about the use of augmented reality and visual search in order to make end users, make it very easy for them to find and retrieve and work with your information. It's basically the new way of working. So no longer work with printed manuals, but make them become much more interactively using technologies like augmented reality. So feel free to sign up for those as well. So documentation. What can we say about documentation? Well, it really depends on who you're talking to. If you're an author, like most of us at Etteplan, then of course, it's your job, you like what you're doing. But for a lot of companies, it's not really regarded as their core business. It's their core business to create a machine, to sell this machine, and then in order to make sure that the service business, so after a machine has been taken into use, make sure that also the service business after that is doing great. For that, of course, you need documentation. You need to explain to people how to install, work, or maintain a machine, or at least have the service engineers do an efficient job as possible. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's the core business of a lot of companies. However, when we talk about technical documentation, it's sometimes regarded as a necessary evil. We have to have it. Why? Well, because of safety, because of regulations. But of course, if it needs to be there, then that's fine, as long as it doesn't cost me anything, right? So it needs to have the lowest possible cost. Of course, meeting the safety and regulation requirements, but if needed, it needs to be of high quality, because documentation more and more these days are an integral part of any product. The service business, so the maintenance needs to be done very easily by service engineers. They need to have very quick and easy access to maintenance and spare parts information. But technical documentation also needs to be shipped on time. So whenever a machine or a product goes out the door, is being shipped to a customer, a manual needs to be done just like that, and in 20, 30, sometimes 40 languages, and go out the door as soon as a product is ready. And there's sometimes some challenges with that, because not everyone realizes that we should not necessarily start writing a manual as soon as the product is ready, because there's quite a bit of delay there. Then there's of course the other negative effect of being called by customs that the product is being held at customs because it's missing a manual. And then of course that will be seen by an end user, by a client, as a reason to not pay their bills. So there's quite a number of reasons to have your technical documentation done well. Not only for those, but the last one I'll mention is it needs to be future-proof. And what I mean with future-proof is that if documentation is done the right way, you will be able to start using applications like augmented or even virtual reality. So let me make sure that everyone is seeing my slides, because I do get a question on that. Can you all let me know if you are able to view my slides, just to be on the safe side? You just can click a yes, then it would be great. Just want to make sure that I'm not showing things while you are there. Oh, yes, I get a lot of yeses right now. Thank you for that. And I'll go back to where I was. Apologies. So, other requirements for technical documentation. Well, if we look at the business process, quality needs to always go up, of course. Work orders need to go up because we want to sell more. However, the lead time, we're in a competitive market, needs to go down, just like the cost. Those are basically the generic requirements in a day-to-day business. If we then look at the cost of technical documentation, well, it's a good question. Who really has a good idea, a good understanding of what technical documentation is costing your organization? There's, of course, the number of technical authors that you have on the payroll. Well, what that's, as you can see on this slide, it's basically a horizontal line. Those are the salaries, right? And those, of course, always need to go down from a cost effective point of view. If you are a technical author, I can hear you think, well, does that mean that my income needs to go down? No, of course not. From a business perspective, that's what people are looking for. So how do we get that? And do we have enough information so that we all know how much documentation actually is costing us? Do you have an idea of the hidden costs? You know, what are the translation costs? What are the printing costs? What are the shipping costs, etc., etc.? So there's a lot of challenges with documentation itself, with the content. There's version management. There's the terminology. We need to provide the content in different outputs for a web, PDF. There's the after sales business. Then we need to manage things correctly. There's software updates. And usually when you look at this particular graph here, you see that the engineering goes down as soon as a product is ready, obviously. But at that point, you see costs for technical documentation going up. Because it still needs to be, you know, shipped out the door in the last very moment, and make sure that we have everything in 20, 30, 40 different languages, right? So that's where you see those costs come down. So if you do things the right way, if you do things the most efficient way in a platform for technical documentation, that I'll talk to you about it in a moment, is that you will actually see that these costs will occur sooner, but they actually should be going down. So they should be more parallel with the engineering. As soon as the engineering goes down, costs for documentation should go down as well. Of course, this is great that I say that, but how do we achieve that? Number one is having a content strategy. That means strategy for technical documentation. Just like we have a strategy for our business, we should have a strategy in line, parallel with documentation. And that doesn't that doesn't start with, if we hear content management, if we hear use of simplified English, if we hear about, you know, how do we use illustrations, well, then we can just buy a content management system, or we buy a parts catalog, and then things will be fine. No, as you can see in the content strategy, that's really only step number 4. Step number 1, of course, is agree what information is needed by your end user in the first place. What is necessary to know? What is not necessary? What is nice to know? And then by applying universal standards that are there for documentation, then by determining the scope and the depth, and only then by applying tooling, because the tooling is there to support our strategy and not the other way around, we are able to get a very good understanding and control over the data that we need to provide to our end users and publish that information accordingly. So implementing this strategy, how do we do that? Well, we need to look at basically 4 key principles. Yes, of course, we need to have authors and illustrators in-house that know what they're doing. They need to be trained. So giving them the tooling is not just one thing that you need to do. They need to be aware of the content strategy. Where do we need to go, and get appropriate training for that. We need to start working in single sourcing, so the use of XML, topic-based authoring. And then, of course, we need to simplify the content as well. What do those mean? Efficiency, future-proof, high-quality technical documentation. Well, let's look a little bit more into depth what that means. If we start with simplifying the content, okay, that's great, Barry, but what does that mean? Well, it means that there are standards out there that you can use for technical communication. They bring high safety, high quality, through clarity. They bring you cost savings for translation and printing. And they make sure that service maintenance can actually be prevented from happening because someone, a field service engineer, understands the technical information that's being handed to them, and therefore the risk of something going wrong during a maintenance procedure is less, and that means you do not actually have to call someone if there's any downtime. The approach is, what we do is we have trained our authors in the use of controlled authoring, simplified English. So we define corporate standards for tone of voice, style, terminology, just to make sure that people are, well, they're really combining or complying with the 3 C's, as we'd like to call it: clarity, conciseness, and consistency. And then we use our tooling, it's called HyperSTE, to make sure that everyone is, while they're authoring, are using the correct terminology consistently, that is, and are sticking with the need to know and not so much with the nice to know. That alone, in conclusion, in combination with the training, has resulted in 30% cost savings in documentation and translation alone. We were able to reduce a 1,500-page manual down to 900 pages. 900 pages in pages, but the text itself was reduced with another 20%, and we started using more illustrations. And that brought actually the cost down even further for documentation and translation. But more importantly, it was easier and faster to understand by the end user, which meant safety and efficiency overall. So that's on the content, on the text. If we're not doing that, if we're not providing our end users with clear information, then we're going to get confused and frustrated readers. The translation costs are going to be much higher than we anticipated. But if the source is bad, you cannot expect the translations to be great as well. Safety risk, in-field equipment damage. There's a potential for legal liability. How many support calls do we get because people don't understand what they're reading? And how ineffective or how effective is our customer service as a result as well? So that's on the text. Another methodology that we use is through the use of SVG or XVL files is simplified illustrations. And simplified illustrations, what that means is that we combine the use of single sourcing, so XML, the next slide will talk about that, in combination with using the 3D source data and simplifying that. So what that means is we take the 3D, we simplify it, again, based on what is needed to know by our end users, and that will actually give us 3 major benefits. Number 1, we no longer have to worry about the intellectual property rights. So engineers can are actually happy to provide us with this data. Number 2, by simplifying the process, you optimize the content, the illustrations, for reuse. And number 3, because of that aspect, it's actually a lot easier. Number 3 would be because we're sticking with the need to know, it's actually now much easier to understand by our end users, because the drawings, the illustrations that we are giving them are much easier, simpler to understand. The idea is then that we combine the 3D, simplify it, and then structure it into XML, XVL using a content management system, and from there on, through SVG configurators, you can actually start publishing the information interactively, but also single sourcing. Apply single sourcing to illustration. That means you only have to, let's say that these 6 valves here are in the next release turning into 5 valves, because more efficiency, whatever, on the engineering side. Then we are able to just update the 3D file once, and now everything on our manuals, these things are updated. This step alone has resulted in our own illustrators reducing 70% of their time. So other, of course, benefits are that there's no language barriers. Picture says more than 1,000 words, regardless of which language you're doing that in. And of course, you don't need as much translations anymore. Third cornerstone is then the application of single sourcing and topic-based authoring. So through the use of XML, it makes content much easier to manage. But through the publication, it makes it much faster to retrieve. And not only are we able to publish in the good old PDF format or printed format, but you can actually make information reusable throughout different types of publications. For instance, interactively on an iPad. And in order to demonstrate that, let me briefly open this up for you. This is a viewer where I'm logging in as a service engineer, and I'm now going to look for the manual for a medical device, which is called the Electa Linac. I can do that by scanning the QR code on the content or on the machine by doing a textual search, or in this case I'm doing a visual search. I'm clicking on this, it's retrieving the content, the simplified content, the XML content from the content management system. I click on it and now I have a simplified illustration, as you can see, derived from the 3D. That allows me to click on, so information is very interactive, very powerful, the use of visual search, because you no longer have to go through an index file where it may be that people are using 20 different terms for this particular treatment table, which we saw in reality had 20 other terms. They called it couch, they called it patient table, they called it treatment facility, they call it whatever. So the idea there is that through visual search, it doesn't really matter what it's called. That's what I need to have more information on. But if I want to get to a procedure for doing a maintenance procedure for this particular arm here on the left, I click on it, information for maintenance becomes available, and through just a couple of easy clicks, I am being told what I need to know, how to prepare it, and how to then remove the detector touch guard. It tells me in simplified English how to remove the fasteners, how to remove the detector touch guard with a simplified illustration in case I need to learn more, or if I simply want to use an animation to show it to the end users, then we can do that. And they don't even have to read anymore. If I want to get feedback, because we sometimes find that manuals that are at our customer's facility are engineers or field service engineers, they write in it, they make notes, but those notes never come back to our authors. So we included a feedback button. And in addition to that, you can simply create an order form as well in case you want to have them order parts, or simply connect it with a parts system. All of these things are possible. So that's just from an interactive point of view. I'll take it a step further now by showing that this, by having everything done in XML, set up this way, it's now also possible to start publishing to augmented reality. I'll do that right here. So we're looking at a circuit board right here. The iPad software, the AR, augmented reality software, recognizes, so there's no QR code, it recognizes the circuit board. It has the exact same procedures that we just saw interactively that you may have in a PDF file, and it allows you to just click on them and go from one procedure to the next, or go back, and then having all of these things work very interactively using the 3D information and getting very good feedback on, okay, what it is that I need to know. And makes it information even easier and faster and better to understand. We can save quite a bit of time and quite a bit of cost there. The idea, of course, is that you will not be able to use augmented reality if you have not applied the methodology that I just described. So the use of simplified English, the use of these simplified technical illustrations in combination with single sourcing and topic-based authoring. So we now have determined, hopefully, what our technical documentation, what the requirements are, of course, and where we want to go, what our content strategy should be all about. From an IT point of view, just to show you the framework that we should have in place to support the content strategy. So that was that step number 4. So written content needs to be validated to make sure that the content is clear, concise, and consistent. Illustrated content needs to be simplified and managed into a content management system. Together with the text, with the parts data, we can make then the information available, through good old PDF files, but we can also make it available in an online distribution server through an interactive viewer, for instance, through a link with a parts catalog, linking it also to external systems like ERPs, PDOs, etc. And in case you need to have everything managed and digitalized, you can also start adding an enterprise document management system as well. just to give you an overall idea of, from an IT point of view, what the framework should look like. Now, into the outsourcing. Outsourcing, yes or no? Do we want to do all of this ourselves, or should we outsource everything, or should we maybe outsource parts of this? The idea is that the question, of course, is why should we outsource? Well, because documentation may not necessarily be regarded as your core business, which means that time and attention on your content strategy, so the strategy for technical documentation, can and should be carefully spent on your own business strategy and not take away the valuable time from that. Important to mention here is that we cannot lose control. We should always have the feeling or know that we are in control still over documentation deliverables. So the idea is that we actually need to shift from managing people to managing more of a strategic direction, right? Retain in-house control, as I mentioned, represent our business, but communicate the business or customer requirements to our outsourcing partner. So focus on the deliverables rather than on the people or the documentation methods. Because in the end, the deliverables are what our end users, our customers need. Easier said than done, of course, because we also need to understand how to then work with an outsourcing partner. So what are the roadmaps? What are the forecasts? What are the KPIs, etc.? The key questions in that regard is that we need to ask ourselves is, okay, so we have this content strategy. Now, does outsourcing documentation, does it actually reduce the cost to directly achieve an objective? Outsourcing, does it improve documentation? Does it improve the service quality? Does it increase the leverage available to service delivery by removing the resource constraint and allowing access to skills and resources in a more effective way? Does documentation, outsourcing it, does it reduce the risk associated with people and redundancies? Does it avoid redundancies? Does it provide career opportunities to our staff? And does it actually solve a technical problem? Like, does it improve the efficiency? Does it make us focus more on our core competence, etc.? There's benefits, of course, with outsourcing, but there's also concerns that need to get addressed. So yes, I'm sure costs can be reduced. Yes, I'm sure that costs become more predictable, costs become more visible. It allows me to get really a grip on what used to be called the hidden cost is now much more visible, I should say, sorry. I should be able to get more flexible service delivery. I should be able to get an improved service quality, better access to specialist skills. I should be able to focus more on my core business. Important that I mention that we need less and more flexible resources as well. So whenever there's a peak, I should be able to get in additional resources, and whenever there's a low, I should be able to give them back to the outsourcing party. So that we can actually convert the fixed cost to lower variable cost. We need less capital as a result. We get access to improved technology. We actually now have people that have their core business as technical documentation, so they should know what they're talking about, right? And in addition to that, reduce the headcount. Concerns, however, defining the service levels. What will this do to the morale of the staff? How much time goes into actually managing the contract? How can I make sure that the quality of service is still there? How much coordination is in there? How much control will I lose? What if the partner is not flexible enough? What if the costs are escalating rather than going down? How much time and effort from our side goes into actually the outsourcing? And what if the partner is not responsive enough? Very important concerns. So the considerations that we need to have when outsourcing technical documentation is that we need to understand both the customer as well as the outsourcing party to understand the company goals and the company objectives. Is there a strategic vision and plan in place? Is there a content strategy in place? If there is in place, how effective is it? We need to open up communications with affected individuals and groups. So we need to see if we're going to outsource, who is going to be affected, and we need to start opening the communication lines with them. We need to get senior executive support. We need to get any stakeholders that are involved. We need to get their support. We need to get them on board as well. Meaning that we also need to take very careful or pay very careful attention to the personnel issues in case there should be any, or potential personnel issues. Get a very properly structured agreement with the outsourcing partner, and a service level agreement is very important there. And of course, once everything is done, there needs to be an ongoing management of the relationship. Okay, I believe that, yes, I'm back online again. So thanks everyone for being patient here. Okay, so what does that mean? So what would be the next step? Well, the next step is something that we call a feasibility study. Of course, we think these things are feasible, but we need to get an idea of what the value of documentation is. In order to create an ROI, return on investment, you can only do that if we have a very good idea of what the cost is. So what is the cost structure of technical documentation? Is it even there? What are the personnel, the administration costs? What are the other operating expenses? Are there process description, quality specifications? Which tools are we using? How decentralized are the tools and the way of working? Or is it centralized and we still not have an idea? We did a feasibility study for one of our customers, and it turned out that they thought they had 20 technical authors. All of a sudden they were 30 or 40 because it was found that some of the engineers were using 10% of their time also writing content. What's the annual volume of documentation? To what extent do you actually need documentation for your end products? Are there any metrics, any performance issues? Human resources, we need to have a chat with them. Where are we going with this? What does this mean for the personnel? All of these things. What are the key processes? Are there short-term goals? Are there long-term goals? All of these things we need to get a good understanding with. Now, what we would do, what we would offer at Etteplan Info, it's an outsourcing service model for technical documentation. In short, it means three things. It means we would assume the responsibility of technical documentation, so we would help you manage it, or we would take over the managing part of it. So typical cost savings there is 10%. Really, why, you would ask? Well, because that fixed cost that we saw earlier, that slide, is now going to become variable, and we're going to make sure that the variable will go down by simply managing the process for you, by putting in resources when needed and taking away when not needed. Does that mean that we all can no longer use our own technical authors? No, the contrary. They will actually move over to Etteplan. What that means, I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Secondly, implementing methodology, technology, so the use of simplified English, the use of simplified illustrations, XML, etc., etc. And if you're already doing that, we're going to help you make sure that these business goals that we have are being met. Typical cost savings there are 30%. Offshoring to China is a third one there. So whenever we have all number 1 and number 2 implemented, we're going to see to what extent can we actually give some of this work to our Chinese colleagues who can do the work in exact same quality, against the exact same quality, but at a lower cost. And how will that help save cost? Give you an idea of the advanced methods and the technology that is available. So content that is either new or legacy content, or even if we have paper, we are able to get a quality checker on top of that using simplified illustrations whenever we create. Or digitize in case we just want to simply go from paper to digitalization. Managing the content in a content management system in a parts catalog. These are our solutions, which are actually umbrella names. So we work with different systems and we look at our customers' needs and then help determine which tools work best for their particular needs. And then being able to publish to PDF, print, work with interactive viewers, create printing on demand if needed, make sure that information is accessible online and on mobile devices. And wherever we implement these, it's important to know that risks and investments will always be shared, because if it's in your advantage, it automatically is in our advantage as well. Briefly about Etteplan China, which was the third step. We have about 220 folks there right now, divided over 3 offices, mainly in the Shanghai area. So we're in Shanghai, we're a little bit outside of Shanghai in Kunshan, and a little bit further away in Suzhou. Currently servicing over 120 customers, including Sandvik, Cargotec, and Philips Healthcare, and now Health Tech since recently. We provide offshore support, meaning that Western companies that we use our Chinese offices, where of course the quality and security is really number one for us, to make sure that we have very cost-effective deliverables, but we also offer local support. So to Chinese companies in, in China, of course, otherwise I would call them Chinese companies, but both offshore and local support. Briefly about the outsourcing process. What does that mean? Well, a typical roadmap can look like this. We determine, once we have that feasibility studies done, we can help determine what the guidelines are for cooperation. We're going to assess a whole bunch of things. We're of course going to have some negotiations and decisions that need to be made. Then usually the service initiates. We'll start ramping up things on certain aspects, and then ramping down things on other aspects. And then once that is done, we will manage the continuous operations. From an HR perspective, has a separate slide because it's important that we mention that here, is that we do due diligence. We communicate things to the people. We get them involved. Very important that you get them involved in the beginning, so that you get stakeholders, you get people that want to do this, explain to them what needs to be done, and they are good to go from the start. Very important that you involve at least the key stakeholders there. What's important to also mention here is that whenever people will become part of Etteplan, they actually become, we can provide them with a career path. A technical documentation specialist before was an author, but with us, he can actually progress to other parts of technical documentation, even moving into project management or even managerial aspects. It's important to mention that because sometimes people think, well, what does this mean? Well, it actually, I would say that out of the Etteplan Info projects that we've done so far, a very small percentage of authors decided to do something else. So we were able to retain a lot of them, and the career path played an important role in that. From an organization point of view, this is kind of how that would look like. There would be a steering group. That would be important that we would have one contact at the customer, working with one contact at Etteplan to make sure that we are aware of the KPIs, the project planning, etc., so that we make sure that whichever agreements, whichever KPIs we set are being met and are being managed and are being monitored. Some typical examples here of objectives, increasing the delivery reliability, increasing the flexibility, the efficiency, improving the quality. How do we do that? Because of course this sounds great, but how do we do that to achieve that? Well, we set KPIs that we can measure, manage, monitor, for delivery reliability, for the work performance, make sure that everything is done on time. And if not, then what is that causing? And then we can do something about it. What does that mean for quality assurance, etc., etc. And then the results are usually that we get targeted results, we get a very good idea of the cost, how reliable a deliverable is, and of course the quality that comes with it. And we monitor the service on a daily, weekly basis, and then we adapt where necessary. So that was quite a bit of information. We are now at 43 minutes. I apologize, we were running a couple minutes late because we lost some audio there. My apologies again for that. I'll briefly go through some outsourcing cases and just to briefly talk to you about what this meant for some of our customers, and then I would like to open up the questions. So if you already have some questions now, feel free to start asking them in the question box and I'll address them momentarily. Few slides about some outsource cases: Valmet, ABB, Autotech, Siemens, Fortin, Vacon, or Vacon, however you want to pronounce it, now known as Danfoss drives, and Husqvarna, which is actually a recent one, are some of these outsource cases that we have done successfully in the past. Only recently, since January this year, we have now entered into a cooperation agreement with Husqvarna. That is the Husqvarna group. So the brands that you see on your right, it's garden equipment, are all of the brands that are now being outsourced to Etteplan. We started in Sweden. We will now move into Germany and also to Charlotte in the US, something that is going to be worked on as well. Then there are sites in China and Japan that will then follow suit as soon as that is done. So it's kind of a step-by-step approach where basically we set out these KPIs, we set out a very good solid agreement where we're going to make sure that Husqvarna, who outsource their technical documentation function to Etteplan, is getting the cost savings that we analyzed for them and with them during the feasibility study. What does that mean? Well, we defined some really good processes for operational tools and IT, the organization, human resources management, what the business model is, what the legal agreements are, etc., etc. And then the global implementation was done in 3 steps. It starts in Sweden, as I mentioned already, and then moving on to other sites around the world, where we globally implement the best-in-class methodology, simplified English, simplified illustrations, etc., etc., as well as the tooling that comes with that. Thirdly is the flexibility and cost effectiveness that is reached through offshoring, meaning that we are also going to offshore some of the work to our Chinese colleagues. The result is that not only will the technical documentation function itself be much more effectively, we are able to produce content interactively on iPads, easier to understand, easier to work with, which will improve the user experience, which will drive costs down, which will increase the quality, which will reduce the downtime, and then everything that comes with that and is followed on as well. So costs will go down through some very clearly defined KPIs. For the staff, there's great opportunities to develop and pursue a career where we, of course, have documentation as our core business. Okay, any questions on this? Before I open up the Q&A, is you are able to reach me at barry.braster@etteplan.com. In case you want to know more about Etteplan, feel free to visit our website at etteplan.com. We also have a separate website for technical documentation, which is this one, technicaldocumentation.services. You can download a free copy of our latest technical documentation brochure that you can see here on your right. So that concludes the webinar. Let's see if there's any questions here. Okay, let me see. A couple of questions coming in now from ABB. Actually, Curtis, what I would like to do is because we also have an NDA with ABB, so I would love to answer that question that you have there, but I would like to do it offline. It's not something I can share to what extent the outsourcing was done. So feel free to email me, barry.braster@etteplan.com, and I'll be able to answer that question for you. Do we have the expertise to do service and repair procedures without the help of the OEM subject matter experts on construction equipment? Yes, we do. We are, like I said, we're 1,900 people strong, so it's very likely we work with construction equipment. We basically have a very big footprint in the heavy equipment industry. We basically do everything except the actual construction itself, of course. That's done by our customers. But we have the expertise in-house to do that. That being said, we will always, at least at first, need to work somewhat together with the subject matter experts to make sure we have a correct understanding. And from then on, once we do, we can actually ramp up the activities on our side and ramp down the time spent on the SME's side. Hopefully that answered your question, Paul. Any other questions? I see no other questions coming in. Okay, very good. Well, that means we are at 50 minutes on the dot, so very good. I'd like to thank you all for participating. And just to let you know again that the slides are available if needed. The link will, like I mentioned, the webinar is recorded. Probably will include me being quiet for 2 minutes asking you where everyone is, but apologies for that. Maybe we can do some rework on that and cut that out, but it will become available shortly. If you send me a request for the link to barry.braster@etteplan.com, I'll go back to that particular address and I'll be happy to forward you a recording. Thank you all for attending. I see that there might be some other questions coming in. Is the technical writer who finds out about legal requirements and standards? Is it the technical writer? Oh, is it the technical writer who finds out about legal requirements and standards? It really depends, Lena. Thank you for your question. It's something really before you give this work to a technical author, and rather than saying, hey, can you go ahead and start writing, please? It's not really the way to go. It's like, there needs to be that content strategy, and that content strategy is not determined by a technical writer. It's determined by whoever is in charge of technical documentation, probably in conjunction with quality, probably in conjunction with a few other management personnel in your organization. So that is really done from a management point of view, and only when that is done, then you actually, of course, the technical author can have his saying. Of course, it's his expertise to do the authoring, but really it's something from a management point of view that needs to be set out. What is our strategy? What universal standards are there? And let's go and work with them. By the way, this webinar I basically mentioned most, if not all of them. Have we created mobile applications for accessing technical documentation? Yes, we have. Be more than happy to talk to you about that offline. Yeah, you can also have a look on HyperSTE, by the way, on that tool. We have a separate website for that as well. That's called simplifiedenglish.com. simplifiedenglish.com, that has more information about the use of simplified English or content quality in that regard. Okay, any further questions? Since we're running out of time now, feel free to ask me, barry.braster@etteplan.com. I'll be more than happy to answer them for you or forward them to my colleagues in your specific countries. Thank you all for attending, and hope to welcome you on the next webinar. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.